Hello and good evening and welcome to another Our Whiskey tasting. Hi everyone, how are you all doing? I hope everyone's keeping well at home and avoiding rain, staying nice and warm. What a rainy spring we've had already. It's just been so miserable. I can't wait for it all to warm up, but at least we've got some lovely, nice light mornings at the moment. Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining us. I can see some familiar names are with us already. Alistair, hi. Sarah Rose, I loved the photo you put on Instagram, absolutely perfect. I'm so pleased you're ready with your whiskies, raring to go. Stephanie, hi. Steph, how are you? Nice to see you. Please do say hi if you're watching along. Say hello on the chat and just let us know where you are. It's lovely to see everybody joining us. We've got a couple of really great whiskies lined up for you today, as you'll have seen if you've gone into your Our Whiskey tasting pack and had a look, which is this thing. You would have had this through the door, and I've left the tasting card somewhere, but inside your tasting packs, which you get through your door every month, you will have had two whiskies. Number one and number two. We've got two amazing whiskies for you tonight. So Kyrö Woodsmoke from Finland, and we have Stauning El Clasico from Denmark. Two incredible whiskies. I was so excited when I tried these and was writing tasting notes for you guys because I just was so excited. You know, sometimes when you taste a whiskey, you do like a little happy dance. That was certainly me when tasting these. So I really hope that you enjoy them as well. And we've got two wonderful speakers with us as well, the co-founders of these two distilleries, which is so exciting. So really happy to have them both here. I'm going to bring them on to say hi. Don't forget, if you've got any questions as we go along, please do ask them and we'll just try and get as many answered for you as possible. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome into the chat Alex Munch, who is the co-founder of Stauning. Hi, Alex.
Hello. Hi, Becky. Nice to see you.
Hi, good to have you.
Thank you very much. Nice being here.
And we also have the lovely Miika Lipiäinen from Kyrö in Finland. Hi, Miika.
Hello, 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 and thank you for the lovely compliments.
Well, they'll be coming along thick and fast as we go through the tastings, so get used to them. It's so lovely to have you both here because I'm pretty certain we've done we've certainly done these tastings during lockdown before. I think Alistair might have been with us for tastings earlier on during the first iterations of our whiskey festival, but certainly I know some others like Tabby and Chris, whose names I can't see in the chat right now. So two of our regulars maybe aren't online watching us, but hopefully, guys, you're watching this on catch up. I am so excited because I think rye whiskey is having a bit of a thing at the moment. And I'm not talking rye whiskey from North America. So Canadian and American rye whiskey is what I think everybody assumes is the only place where rye whiskey is being made. But in fact, it's all over the world now. And particularly the Nordics are really excelling in this area, aren't they? Well, you two would know because you're making it.
We're doing our best. We're coming.
Coming to get the American.
Yes, exactly. Trying to get the Americans. Well, so Scotland as well. I mean, we just had the news today that Inchdenny's rye whiskey has just been launched, which is a really exciting one. I'm actually going up to the distillery tomorrow to check out the distillery and how they're making it and to try it as well. So I'll let everyone know what that's like. And then we also had Brooke Laddie announcing their rye whiskey recently too. So there's so much going on in this area in Europe. I think European rye is going to be the next one to watch.
Well, I hope so too.
Absolutely. And shout out to Patrick Suidam in Netherlands, who was here before anybody else was here.
Of course.
Talking about European rye.
Mm-hmm. With the millstone.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, I think without further ado, hi Chris, lovely to see you here. Without further ado, I think we'll probably dig into some of these whiskies. What do you all think? We'll kick off with the Stauning. I think it's a little bit of a sweeter whiskey before we dive into the Kyrö Woodsmoke. So, Alex, as everyone is opening their bottle of whiskey and pouring themselves a lovely glass of your wonderful whiskey, please could you explain what El Clasico is all about? That's the one.
Yes, that's the one. Well, yes, El Clasico is kind of a weird name. I'll bet you a lot of people out there think, "Ooh, sounds crazy." El Clasico is a rye whiskey aged in American white oak, virgin white oak, heavy char, for 3 to 4 years, and then it is finished off in a Spanish vermouth cask for more than 6 months. Depends on if we put it in during winter time, it will have to probably be there up to 8, 10, 12 months sometimes, but over the summer a lot of things are happening in the cask, so 6 months minimum it finishes in the vermouth cask. And the name El Clasico actually came from that I'm the one in charge of development and branding of Stauning whiskey, but I use my 8 other co-founders also to find out what we should name our whiskeys and how we should put them together. And this one simply couldn't find the name for, because this is kind of a extremely strong Manhattan cocktail, this whiskey. And that was the idea, can we make, rye is so famous together with Manhattan cocktails. Can we make kind of a take on the Manhattan in a whiskey bottle? And we were looking to find a name. It simply didn't work. We couldn't find it. Several weeks went. And then I was sitting with my co-founder, Hans, and we were Googling, as we do a lot, both for recipes or new ideas and stuff like that. As I remembered, he looked up Manhattan cocktail on the internet, but it came into Wikipedia in Spanish. And when you then read this in Spanish, it says Manhattan is a cocktail, El Clasico, something like that. I don't speak Spanish. And we were like, El Clasico, the classic cocktail. We put it for sale. And what we didn't realize, the Friday or Saturday we put it for sale, it was actually the football match of El Clasico. So Barcelona against Real Madrid, the famous game. The bottles were simply just sold out within a short period of time, I can say. And we're like, what happened? But that was probably due to that football game, El Clasico. So people are now drinking El Clasico when they see El Clasico. Let's just try to taste it. And I'll go just tell you a bit more about the whiskey in a second. So it's, as you just put it, it's a sweeter kind of rye whiskey, this one. Usually when we make our rye whiskeys, they're not as heavy and spicy and woody as the American rye whiskeys. Often I hear when I talk to kind of modern whiskey drinker, young whiskey drinkers, that they do not like the rye whiskeys straight, neat, because they're too spicy and too strong. But this one is a lower ABV than some of the really powerful American rye whiskeys. It's made in double distillation, so also a different way of producing than the American rye whiskeys. It's got a lot of kind of orange, sweetness, cinnamon, apple, pear fruitiness to it. You also detect the vermouth in this, but not so much on the nose, I think. It's more on the aftertaste. So first, not either in the taste when you just get it into your mouth, but aftertaste, you clearly detect that vermouth character. It's 45.7% ABV, so it's almost like winey in character, sweet wine, which a lot of kind of new whiskey drinkers really find fascinating. It's not the classic whiskey style we have in a glass like this. This is part of our research series, so it's not a core product. So far we have 3 research: El Clasico, Bastard, and Curious. Curious is a peat smoked rye new make, and Bastard is a rye whiskey that's been aged in mezcal casks. And those are the 3 we have, and we have a new one coming up this fall, a quite new research series, which is going to be super cool. But this one is of my favorite of the 3 of our research series.
When did you release this one, Alex?
2000, and I think it was actually the summer of COVID, when that kind of hit the world. Yes, it was. Yeah, when was that? 19? I can't remember now. Was that the first 20? How can I forget that fast? Yeah. Incredible.
this, tasting it for this tasting pack, I really wanted to go for the style of Scandinavian Nordic rye that's just a little bit different. So we know what rye whiskey tastes like, as you say. It's got that typical bready, spicy kind of character to it. But I think what both you and what the guys at Kyrö are doing are kind of subverting our expectations of what rye whiskey can be through what we'll see two different production methods. One is really focusing on the cask, and what Miika and Kyrö are doing are really focusing on the treatment of the grain, so the smoking of the grain. So really interesting one. Some fascinating tasting notes, and I've got to say, the one tasting note that I immediately was like, oh god, yeah, you're totally right, is Alistair says the nose reminds him of Italian herb bread. It's like the Subway Italian herb seasoned bread that you can get. It's like it has that note of like oregano,
and exactly the dried spice.
Yeah, it really does. And then and that comes through on the finish as well, that really nice kind of herbal note. Is that from the vermouth or is that from the rye, do you think?
Vermouth, for sure. And we have different kinds of vermouth we're testing right now. So we also have an Italian vermouth, and of course vermouth are different. Italian vermouth is different, Spanish vermouth is different within brands, but it's certainly the vermouth because we can now detect different herbs or flavors or with the same rye whiskey but the different vermouth. So it is certainly that.
Yeah, and I think there's a question here from Chris about how to use this in a cocktail. So would this make a supercharged Manhattan? I mean, I'm assuming yes. This would just really enhance the flavor of that, wouldn't it?
This is my own bottle from my bar cabinets. I use this for Manhattans.
There you go, Chris. Absolutely, yes. I also think it would work quite nicely in a Boulevardier. Like anything else, that, like any other kind of cocktail that would use vermouth naturally, I think would work really nicely.
Yeah, and people think, or you would think that it will be overpowering with the vermouth in a vermouth cocktail, but it's not, because it has totally different flavors in combination with the whiskey. So it's not like double vermouth going into the cocktail. It's different, totally different flavors you get. And I think we do different when we produce our whiskey. We also do things in a very different way from how you do it today. So for instance, we do floor malting. All our rye and barley is floor malted, which also adds to the different character to the whiskey. We have a lower yield than you would normally see when you do normal malting compared to floor malting. We do direct fired stills, so we have 24 pot stills, which also create different, creates different flavors. That Maillard reaction, you have the kind of scorching of the wash also creates some more fruitiness. So the fruitiness we get in this whiskey is not just from the vermouth; it's also from the rye whiskey, which is a lot of pear, apple, and citrus. So when you taste our new make, three things that are very dominant in our new make is actually pear, apple, and citrus. So it's lemon peel, especially. So it's not only the vermouth that gives this orange and lemon peel kind of flavors to it.
Is that typical for rye whiskey to have such orchard fruit citrusy character to it?
I haven't. Maybe Miika can, when he comes on, can say something about his or their whiskey, but I haven't really seen it before. And often I actually think it's due to the heavy spice licorice wood you often taste in the American rye whiskies. So it might kind of hide away some of these more delicate flavors. And I don't think it's bad with American rye. I love American rye. One of my favorites is Thomas H. Handy, which is an amazing rye whiskey. I see Miika like that too. Different flavors. So it's not because I don't like it. I'm just thinking that it kind of there's a layer of spice and licorice and wood that kind of covers the fruitiness in some of those whiskies.
Yeah. So Alex, tell us a little bit about the background of Stauning and how you came to launch a distillery and why you decided to focus on rye in particular.
So in 2000, I'll do the short version because we don't have 3 hours. I'll do my best.
You must be well versed at this by now.
So in 2005, my now good friend Martin heard a radio program about whiskey, a Danish radio program. He was on his way to a summer house, and they said in the program, it's easy to make whiskey, but it's difficult to make a good whiskey. He met his family in the summer house, and he said to the family, why don't we try to make the first Danish whiskey? They didn't know that the first Danish whiskey was made in 1950 something. So we're not the first whiskey distillery in Denmark. And I think the first Danish, it was called Clock, C-L-O-C, and they were about for 10, 13 years, something like that. But it wasn't a success in Denmark at that time. I think aquavit was probably more successful in the 50s than whiskey. But the family then said, Martin, we don't know shit about whiskey. We need to bring somebody in that knows more about whiskey. And he said, yeah. I thought about that. Let's create a list of friends and call up those friends. So they made a list of, I think, 14 friends. And luckily, I was one of the first on the list because everybody on the list kind of said, yes. When you ask, would you like to try to start a whiskey distillery? You're like, yes, seems like a great idea. And I just previously, a few days before this, I had a conversation with my wife, and she told me, Alex, you need a hobby, like football or handball or tennis or something like that. I came back, how about whiskey? It's like, nah, not that kind of hobby. but we did. And then we started making, looking into how to make this whiskey. So again, 2005, you didn't Google, I think. We probably did Yahoo, and found out, how do you make whiskey? And got like 10 million hits on how to make whiskey. And we were like, that one. So that was the Scottish way of making whiskey. And some years before this, I had been to a trade show, the first whiskey trade show in Denmark, and I tasted an Ardbeg from 1977. So actually all of us, or some of us, 6 of us, we were like, okay, if you want to make a whiskey, let's try to make that Ardbeg from 1977. That was a good one. So that was kind of our role model, or what we wanted to do. So actually we started up and wanting to make a copy of a Scotch whiskey. Today we're very far away from trying to make a copy. And we did make that one, and some whiskey experts in both in Scotland, England, and other places said that reminds us of Ardbeg from the end period of the 70s. We were like, what? What? We had found some local peat to put smoke into the grain. We did floor malting. We started in a small butchery, because that was the only place we could afford, and we had the permit to make whiskey. So we started using the fridge where you would hang the meat, to do floor malting, because we could control the temperature. The oven where you would smoke the meat, or the kiln, we could smoke the grain. The meat grinder, we could grind the grain. So everything was kind of the tools you have in a butchery we were using for making whiskey, and made that first whiskey that tasted like Ardbeg from the end period of the 70s, as a new make, of course, just the new make. Time went by, and we were like, okay, let's try to make something else. Several people said, you're from Denmark, try to make something different, and maybe single malt, because you're going to fight the Scotch, if you want to make a single malt. And we're like, yeah. In Denmark, like Finland, is all about rye. Our heritage, we've been eating rye bread for centuries. When you drive through Denmark, you see fields of rye. So we started testing on rye, and quickly found out that this is somehow much more interesting for a Danish distillery to produce rye whiskey than doing a copy of Scotch single malt. Scotch do very well making single malts. We do not want to copy that one. And we do not want to do American rye whiskey. We don't want to do Irish whiskey or Japanese. We want to make our own style of whiskey. That's rye. So a lot of the whiskeys we do today has some kind of rye involved in the whiskey. We also have a whiskey called Chaos, which is both barley and rye mixed together or added together. And then slowly, we've started making whiskey, and we released some alcohol. And one of our first customers, on-trade customers, we were very lucky. That was Noma in Copenhagen, the world's best restaurant for, I think, 4 years in a row. And they took all the whiskies away from the shelves and only had Stauning whiskey in the when we started making my first whiskeys. And that of course kind of hit the news, and people were like, oh, interesting, if Noma can have a Danish whiskey, then we can probably also drink a Danish whiskey. And then things just kind of exploded. So going from the small butchery in 2006 to now, where we have a completely new distillery finished in 2018, that one, with 2,500 square meters of floor malting out to the right, and then a kiln, mashing and fermentation, and then to the far left we have a still house with the 24 pot stills. And we do things totally like we did in 2006 in the butchery. So it's still done by hand, most of the work. All is floor malted, still open-fired small stills. We do a weird way of mashing, and I'm pretty sure that Miika can talk much more also about how to mash when handling rye. That is a pain in the butt, and we do it the kind of the Scotch way of distilling and mashing, but we had to invent a completely different machine. So it's more like a washing machine, our mash tun. We've never seen anything like that before. Come to the distillery and take a look. Every time I have people, also all the distillers coming there, they're like, what? What is that? But it works. So we do both our barley and our rye in that weird machine. And now actually people are starting to copy some of our inventions and our innovations in Stauning whiskey. So for example, very soon in Scotland, you'll have a brand new distillery with the same floor malting as we've invented these special machines for floor malting. So you don't get the monkey shoulder. We had to invent some machines that turns the grain automatically, and that's now been exported to Scotland also. That's kind of cool.
It's kind of come full circle, where you started out copying Scotch whiskey because you thought you wanted to emulate that kind of style. They've now started copying you because you're now the trailblazer, and everyone wants a slice of Stauning and what you're up to.
Yeah, but I think the thing is today, I think the world is changing. New world whiskey, the consumer is changing. COVID did a lot of things also to how we look at whiskey. So now it's not so much about yield. It's actually more about flavors and making new interesting stuff, different things. Challenging the consumer. The consumer wants to be challenged. So I think what we do is absolutely not the best way of malting, but it's probably the most fun way of malting. And I think that's becoming more and more clear to people out there. It needs to be fun, just not about volume, liters and alcohol percentage. It's actually having fun while you do this. And that's our DNA, having fun while making whiskey.
That seems to be a very common theme between both of your distilleries. Having fun, certainly from a lot of Kyro's marketing assets, the imagery that we see out and about. And you've got actually, weirdly, a very similar founder story, although switch a abattoir for a dairy farm and a sauna, and it's all weird. It all kind of comes together. Miika, I'm going to come over to you in a minute, but there was a question that came up that I think is important to answer, just because it is something that's a little bit different, and you only really tend to find this with direct fired stills, and there aren't that many in Scotland, so it's not like you'll come across this very often. I think Glenfiddich still have some. Chris Ratcliffe was asking about the Maillard reaction, so that what happens in the stills. It was asking at what point is the grain affected by that? Can you just maybe give an overview of what the Maillard reaction is and what the effect is on whiskey flavour?
So kind of the best way of describing this is not highly scientific stuff I'm saying right now, but when I have my guided tours at a distillery and you have kind of non-whiskey drinkers coming by, I kind of say, try to imagine that you have a kind of a chicken fillet or something like that, and you put it in boiling water, and then you eat it afterwards. Not the most interesting, experience in your life. Then imagine taking that chicken, putting on a pan, and roasting it on the pan. Suddenly you have totally different things going on. You get that scorching and a caramelization that happens when you put it on a pan. It's not 100% similar to that, but it's in that direction. So when we have our wash, it's very important for us to have an unclear, thick, kind of almost slimy wash. And if you go back 60, 70, maybe more years, and you take a look into the washbacks or the mash tuns in Scotland, it would look very similar to what we're doing today. You didn't have the equipment you have today where you can filter off your wort. So you get this clear wort. So we have an unclear wort. And it's so interesting when we meet some of these old distillers or people that's been working in the Scotch or Irish whiskey industry. When they go to a distillery, they're like, oh, this is how it would look when I was young or a boy, the wort and the wash. So we need those solids to go into our washbacks. And within burnt porridge, exactly, I see the comment. And yes, if you don't take care, you will get burnt porridge. So you put it into your wash stills, then you need to heat it up very carefully. Because you want it to kind of rotate the liquid in the still. You do not want it to settle on the bottom of the still, because if it settles, you will get burnt porridge. And trust me, we've done that a lot of times. And trust me, the people in production, they absolutely hate that.
A lot of times as well, judging by those nuts.
It's several hours. When you decide to have 16 wash stills and 8 spirit stills, and then you need to clean 16 wash stills. Not fun. Absolutely not fun. It's an extra long day for people in production when that happens. And the first, I think, 4 months after starting up the new still house, we had burnt porridge in our stills. And to be quite honest, I actually expected a lot of our production people to resign, leave Stauning Whiskey, because it was a hell of a time starting up those new stills. But they're still here today. So that is what you get. And the fun part of this is actually, and I almost can't say this aloud, because some of the best whiskeys we have in Stauning Whiskey is actually the liquid that were burned in the wash stills. So when you taste it just after distillation, it tastes of burnt toast. Really this horrible, special flavor of burnt toast, like seriously burnt toast. You would throw it in the bin if you have toast like this. After a couple of months, it slowly changes. 6 months, a year, 2 years, suddenly this burnt flavor disappears, and you get a very yummy, caramelized, full, complex flavor in your rye whiskey. So if you wanted to make the perfect Stauning, we would burn it every time, but we can't do that. Interesting.
For a special edition at some point, I imagine.
Yes. And we have several 100,000 liters of that stuff. So there will be a big special edition at some point.
What a great mistake.
Actually, we have one of our most famous casks is actually a cask for Restaurant Noma. They bought early stage, we burned 8 casks, or we had 8 casks of burnt rye whiskey. The last one they bought for the restaurant, the full cask. And they tried to buy it, I think, for 2-3 years, and I said no every time they called us and said, can we buy it? I said no, because we're going to use this for something special. One day, one of my colleagues said, well, isn't Noma kind of special? I was like, yeah, okay. So we sold it to them. So they actually got the last cask of the finished old stuff that was burned. Cask 52. If you can find that one,
okay,
you're lucky.
Cask 52. Do you know what it sounds like? You know how some Scotch whiskey distilleries will do like a peat week? They'll do a week of like peated whiskey. They'll do a run. It sounds like you need to do a burnt week. And pay your staff extra to clean up the stuff afterwards. Alex, thank you so much for that. What does everyone think of the El Clasico? I think it's so different. It's so balanced and works just so well. And Sarah Rose, as you say, it's like it turns into this kind of a floral kind of nose, but that beautiful sweetness just carries on through. The citrus is there, the orange peel, delicious. Really, really nice. Thank you, Alex. Thank you. Right, please stick around, don't go anywhere. We're going to move on to Kyrö Distillery now. So Miika, you are up, and we're going to be tasting the lovely wood smoke. So if you've all got your bottle to hand, please pour yourself a dram. I've nearly just missed my glass. Here we go. Miika, now this was a new one to me, and having tried it, I was blown away immediately. And so excited to share this with everyone, because I think it's a phenomenal whiskey. But please do talk us through it.
Thank you. Absolutely. So this is actually our wood smoke pre-release. So it will differ slightly from the one eventually coming out later this year in the UK as well. But yeah, it's 100% rye whiskey from our distillery, made in I think the distillation date will be around 2017, and aged about 4.5 years on average in a combination of New American oak and ex-bourbon. So all of our core bottlings are always battings of the core casks, which we have, i.e. New American oak and ex-bourbon. And then we always seek that balance out to keep the profile, I would like to say steady, but honestly, whiskey is always a live thing, never a dead thing. So it'll always be evolving, even here in the pre-release version, let alone in the final one. But so this is sort of the tail end of the pre-release, and I was really glad that we could share this with you, Becky.
Thank you for sharing it with us. I'm delighted. I hope everyone loves this as well.
That's great. So for us, it's all about rye. It always makes me really glad to have tastings and talk to Alex, to talk to Basti from Stork Club in Germany, to a couple of other true lovers of rye. So we in Finland, we grow up on rye bread, rye porridge, rye everything. It's a hardy crop that's really good for our soil. And unlike in a lot of the world, like almost basically all of continental Europe, UK, US, where it's been grown for animal feed and used as a rotational crop to keep the soil going, for us and the Danes, for the Poles as well, it's always been a human consumption crop. We've always eaten rye in every shape and form. So for us, this was a natural choice to start with rye and rye only. So when it comes to this particular whiskey, it also incorporates another process method that stems from just where we are and what our soil and what our nature is. So for us, we're quite far up north. We have a short growing season, about 12 to 14 weeks. And we only plant winter rye. So the rye has to go into the ground before the ground freezes, and then the snow covers it. It hibernates for the winter and starts growing when the snow melts and you get a bit of sunlight going for the summer. So historically, you'd harvest as late as possible because you want to maximize the growth. And then you have to go out and plant again. So you have very short of a time to make sure that your rye is preserved for the winter so it doesn't go bad. So what we do in Finland, especially in eastern Finland, we put the rye in sheaves on the rafters of a barn without a chimney and burn a bonfire of alder wood, so like a type of birch wood. And unlike in Scotland, where kind of the smoke came in through the malting process, for us it's a rye preservation process. And you impart this delicate, airy, minerally kind of wood smoke instead of that heavier, turfier peat smoke. And that's what you now get together with the 100% rye mash bill.
There's some really lovely tasting notes coming through. Trust. So for me, interesting enough, Alex, you mentioned Danish rye bread and Noma, but there's a bakery right near Empirical Distillery called, do you remember, do you know the one that I'm talking about?
No, probably
in
not.
Copenhagen. There's a bakery and it's going to, what did you say?
Do you mean Empirical Distillery?
No, yes,
Okay.
there's a bakery near Empirical Distillery. Anyway, when I was in Copenhagen, I had the best rye bread at this cafe, slathered with honey, and tasting this whiskey reminds me of that experience. Like straight away, it's just the best rye bread. And we don't do rye bread very well here in the UK. I'll be honest with you, I've tried quite a lot because I've tried to recreate that experience and I can't find it. No, we're not doing rye bread like the Danes or like the Finnish.
I don't want to be impolite about it. I was just living for a year and a bit in London, but yeah, I'm really glad to be back in Finland for the good bread. But obviously for us, it's also like it's both the grain, but it's also water. We've got incredibly soft water since Finland is old land. So Finland has come up from the sea over 10,000 years ago. So we've kind of washed all the hard minerals from the soil, and it already shows in the water really nicely. When you're making whiskey, you don't have to filter. Filter for the bigger gunk with, let's say, 0.5 micron filters, but no reverse osmosis, no UV killing of bacteria, and no removal of limestone or any hard minerals. So it is what it is, and it's just good.
It's just good is simplifying it. Absolutely. There's some amazing tasting notes here. I love the pork barbecue with Szechuan pepper. Szechuan pepper I'm totally getting now. Actually, now you mention that kind of like tangy spice, the citrusy tangy spice going on, which is really lovely. Smoked bubblegum we've got, and then the weird liquidized mince pie, which I get, but I never would have thought.
I understand that, because like there's this sort of breadiness, but again in a very different way from US rye. So for us, if I go a bit into the process, I mean our process is quite similar to Alex in many respects. So we don't filter, we don't lauter, we don't centrifugally remove any of the solids, of the proteins. Everything goes into the wash still. And there we are in that old dairy next to Kyrö River. And so everything goes into the wash still, but on its way, we have a very long fermentation period. So we ferment for about 142, 144 hours, which gives us about 70 hours for alcohol, and then the other 70 hours for a big secondary fermentation with a heavy lactic acid influence. So you get a lot of, you get licorice root, you get some mintiness, you get a bit of menthol, but you get a lot of florality and sweetness coming into it, which now then interplays with the tannins and vanillins from the cask, and then the smokiness.
It's a really beautiful whiskey and so balanced as well. I think sometimes when you're smoking using something other than peat, it can sometimes move the flavor off into a kind of bitter, astringent kind of area, but that's definitely not happened with this. It's retained all of that lovely rye character that you'd expect, but then this kind of wonderful wood smoke, which is really what it is. It's kind of like the dying embers of a bonfire, a charred log. Just this really lovely quality to it, really delicious.
Yeah, that's actually how I describe it quite often. Like, whereas, you know, I love my art. So we in the Nordics, we drink a ton of peated whiskey. So I love my Ardbegs, Laphroaigs, Lagavulins, but it's sometimes like coming up to very active or like a wet bonfire when you're having a massively peated whiskey, where here it's almost coming up to a fire, but the fire's been out for a while, and you still have this kind of like metallic, minerally taste in the air and smell in the air, where you know that there's been a fire here, but it's no longer going.
Yeah, I think on the cocktail suggestions that I did for this, so we have cocktail suggestions for every whiskey, and that's why we have 50 ml served, so everyone can have a little taste of it, see what they think, make some tasting notes, and then go and create a cocktail with that. So for Kyrö, I also put this down as being good for a Boulevardier, like a nice smoky version of a Boulevardier. I think would work absolutely beautifully. But I also think it would work phenomenally well as a hot toddy. Hear me out. I think having an element of smokiness with the citrus character in there as well. The honey all works in together. And I know we're moving into kind of like spring, summer now, but there are colds going around. So this is one to bear in mind. I think it will be a lifesaver for anybody.
Oh, sounds excellent.
Yeah.
For me, actually, the the number one cocktail application for this has maybe even a bit weirdly been a whiskey sours, because like the acidity together with this kind of mineral smoke that you have going on, they work really well together. So I've done a ton of whiskey sours out of this.
Yeah, I agree. And it's a similar thing for the hot toddy as well. I think that citrus works really well with this smoke. It sounds like everyone watching along really enjoys this as well. There's, again, amazing tasting notes. Mince pie in front of an open fire. I'm so glad that these have both got the seal of approval. I do try, you guys, to find like the best whiskies to share with you all. So hopefully there's like a nice seal of approval. Please let us know if you've got any questions at all for Miika or Alex. We'll probably run for another few more minutes during this tasting, but just pop down your questions for them both. We'll try and get around to them. Before we do get to any questions, I've got one for both of you, because before we started this, the three of us were having a little bit of a chat in the green room about rye whiskey in general, and how this seems to be, particularly European rye whiskey, as a category that's really exciting at the moment. So I wanted to ask you both what your thoughts are on that, and what's the future of European rye whiskey?
Good question, Alex.
Well, I somehow thinking back 1 month now, World Whiskies Awards, Millstone won as world's best rye whiskey. We won as world's best single cask rye whiskey. I think somehow that says it all right now, that Kyrö and Stork and Scandinavian and Oxford, is it Artisans? There's a lot of really cool things going on. And I think the especially cool part is that it's not similar to the US rye whiskies. It offers something different that people are open to taste. It's not too spicy, it's not too strong. It's in the same kind of category as single malt whiskies, so you can sit and enjoy it neat. Whereas a lot of people have been scared to enjoy rye whiskies neat for years. So I think that's a huge future on its way.
Why do you think people have been scared to try them neat?
Often when I talk to people, it is these super strong, spicy, super heavy rye whiskies that are often only used for cocktails. So, and if you want to enter into the world of whiskey as a serious brand, you can't just rely on making cocktails. You need to do something where people can sit and enjoy it in front of the bonfire, as we just saw, minced pie in front of the bonfire or something like that. Enjoy coziness, long Evenings, friends. It's not just about cocktails.
Absolutely. Miika, please.
Right. Yeah. Funnily enough, this ties into what you were saying, Alex, earlier. So our entry, like why we started the distillery, I got introduced to rye whiskies by a certain Drew Mayville, who's the master blender of Buffalo Trace, and he had me taste Thomas H. Handy, which was my first rye whiskey that I tasted. And I was immediately like, wow. Nobody's told me about rye. I thought I had no idea about the whole category. I thought it was kind of the ugly cousin of bourbon. And then suddenly it just, hit me and Finland and rye, and almost like a cartoonish, like icons going around and around over my head. So we need to put these together. And I guess for me, having Handy as the first experience, coming back to Finland, where the government is kind enough to take care of our souls and our easily corrupted spirit by having the government monopoly that's all the alcohol here. And the only thing we had there was Jim Beam Rye. And then after the Handy, I took a Jim Beam Rye, which is a very well-made rye, but I kept passing it around in Finland, and everybody was saying, I can't taste rye in this. So for us Finns and Danes, we know what rye really tastes like. So we wanted that. And that needs to be something for us, the philosophy is that taste, that rye taste has to run through the core of no matter what cask finishing, no matter what kind of mash bill, treatment we do. It's all 100% local rye, and it needs to be sippable. So that was the starting point.
Yeah. And I think taking that philosophy really seriously has enabled you to really create both of you a style of whiskey that's a reflection of your local culture, your gastronomy, your place. Like it is the Nordics in a bottle. This is the Finnish and Danish culture, your local rye, the gastronomy, that beautiful rye bread. Chris, you are correct. It was Lille Bakery in Copenhagen. Thank you for that. I don't know if it's still there. I think it is. So if anyone ever finds themselves in Copenhagen, go and find Lille Bakery, because it's definitely worth the trek. It's in a weird part of town that's it's a walk out to, because if it is out by where Empirical was, I don't know if they've closed yet.
Was, yes. Yeah.
Was. They're moving to New York. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
US.
So, but head out, because they do the best rye bread. It's like a scrambled egg on rye bread that they do. It's amazing as well. I had that, and I had some with honey, and it was just useful. A couple of other questions for you both. Do Stauning and Kyrö do tours for the public?
Yes, we do. So we're a bit out of the way. We're in the kind of the north of the north. We're about 3.5 hours by train from Helsinki. The nearest train stop then is only 10 kilometers from our distillery, open especially in the summer. And we've got a fantastic distillery festival as well. So if you fancy hearing what's going on in Finnish independent music and whiskey and good food, I recommend coming August 19th, which is an excellent date. I'm
tempted. Actually, you have me at whiskey.
Please do.
Festival. Perfect.
Yeah.
And I think we have we open actually almost every day of the year. We have both with German and Danish and English tours, and I think the 2019 we had around 20,000 guests passing by the distillery, and then of course under COVID things went down, but we're slowly getting back now again. So we have 4 or 5 tours a day. So plenty of possibilities to go on a tour in Stauning.
Amazing. Sarah Rose is free on August the 19th. Maybe we organise a little whiskey excursion to Kyrö's festival. Maybe.
Come on in. I promise the only disappointing thing about the distillery tour, again, thanks to our government, is that you cannot buy a bottle from the distillery because the monopolies.
Oh, yes.
Of course.
But Miika, can I ask you a question then? Can you taste in the distillery? Is that allowed to do that?
Yes, we had to start a separate restaurant company in order to be able to do the tastings. And there's a lot of now you see me now, you don't kind of you can't move with the glass into this space, but you can be here. So it is sometimes a weird system.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
Oh, okay. Well, no buying bottles, but we will have cocktails and whiskey for sure, at least. Anyway, and Steph Peck is in as well. I feel like this might happen. I feel like we're going to momentum.
Love to have you.
I think probably just one last question for you both. We've just come up from Chris here, which is what? Obviously, we've tried the vermouth cask finish, but what cask finishes go well with rye, but you don't think have been tried yet, or maybe released yet? Are you working on anything that's interesting? Or to subvert that question, what have you tried that just doesn't work at all?
Well, if I can start up, Miika, we are doing a lot of very weird experiments at the moment, and it's all about cask finishes actually at the moment. Well, smoking and cask finishing. At the moment, the weirdest stuff we have is, I think, the Balsamico cask. So we have the oldest producer of Balsamico in Italy. We've made a collab with them, 437 years old. Not the Balsamico, but the producer. Some really old Balsamicos we've been aging rye whiskey in. We also have some Tabasco casks that we've done some finishes, and people might think that that's stupid or too weird, and I tell you, it is extremely spicy. It's like and I can't explain you why, but it is more spicy to drink this stuff than actually drink directly off the Tabasco bottle. It's like the ABV, the 61% ABV, kind of opens up your, what do you call the palate of your on your tongue, and then the Tabasco just kicks in. I've seen one of my distillery people is a very calm guy. He's always very calm. He took a huge sip, even though I warned him. He took a huge sip of this one, and he was running around for 10 minutes with his tongue out of his mouth, like this. This is way too strong as it is, but we will, of course, balance it up. Then we've done some stout, some pepper stout casks from Miika, a Danish brewery. And this might sound awful, but when you nose and taste this, it's like going into the zoo, kind of the elephant cage. You get this ammonium or this kind of really heavy, you almost start to cry kind of smell. And for a lot of people, it's not something they would go for. But I've had some of the 3 bartenders in the world taste this, and they asked us if they could buy the cask because it was so interesting. So it won't probably work for a lot of people, but for some people, this is just super. So we do a lot of that in combination with seaweed smoked rye and Christmas tree smoked rye and hemp smoked rye, and a lot of different combinations going in, combined with these casks, will create something totally crazy. I'm sure of that.
I love it. This is totally insane.
That's a really good jumping off point, Alex. I mean, I was about to say that beer is difficult. Like getting beer casks right is tough. So you'll end up with some of those like interesting, where interesting means exactly what you said. 1 out of 10 will love it, and the rest is kind of hate it. So interesting, but maybe not commercially that viable. Out of some of the like really successful ones, there was a question about what is Kyrö Monbasiak. So we released a cask of our Kyrö malt mash bill, so 100% malted rye, and in a Monbasiak cask, which is a sweeter, a bit acidic French dessert wine. And I was dead sure it's never going to work. But lo and behold, I was wrong. Our head distiller, Kalle, was right. And weirdly enough, I've had not like a ton, but a lot of white wine cask finishes from different distilleries. I have like none of them thus far. But the Monbasiak, even with that acidity coming through to the palate on the aftertaste, was actually really successful as trial. So we'll probably do more different sort of like sweet, slightly punchier sweet white wine finishes in the future too. And another one is that's really interesting. We released the one wood smoke recipe with it in a very kind of limited affair, Vin Santo. So Spanish church wine, Italian church wine, and that those casks don't really get around. They're not really respected domestically there, but some of them are really still available, and we've had some fantastic trials in Vinsanto casks, although they're very prone to sulfur as well. So some of them have gone bad as well. But interesting stuff coming up.
It's so lovely to hear the experimentation that's going on with both distilleries, the weird, the wonderful, the successful and the not successful. It's so fascinating. I love the idea of the balsamic cask, the Tabasco, the different wine casks as well. Is just amazing, and hopefully keep pushing on the beer and finding something that really works well. Alex and Miika, thank you so much for joining us for this tasting and for providing such wonderful whiskey for us to taste. It sounds like everyone's absolutely loved the El Clasico and the wood smoke, so thank you. Before I say goodbye to everyone, again, thank you all for joining us for yet another live stream tasting. I'm going to be sending around a bit of a questionnaire just to see where we're at with our whiskey and see how you guys are all getting on. So when that lands in your inbox, please do fill out the questionnaire. It will help me make these tastings better for all of you. So do fill those out. For now, though, thank you so much for joining us. Alex, Miika, appreciate it. And we'll see you all again next time. Have a lovely evening and yeah, take care. Bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.